The state penitentiary carried a heaviness that clung to every surface. The concrete walls were stained with years of despair, the iron gates groaning each time they opened, and the fluorescent lights flickering, as if even electricity resisted staying there. Within that world of punishment and monotony lived Elena Torres. At 32, Elena was different from the other women. While most inmates shouted, cursed, and clawed for scraps of attention, she was silent. She spoke little, rarely looked anyone in the eye, and carried herself with an unsettling calm that unnerved guards and inmates alike. Her crime, fraud and financial deception, did not match the hardened criminals she shared space with, yet there was something about her presence that demanded caution. From her corner of the cafeteria she observed more than she participated. Her dark eyes studied everyone, like a chess player, calculating several moves ahead. Whispers among inmates painted her as dangerous, not because of violence, but because she seemed to know things she shouldn't. She never fought, yet no one dared to cross her. Michael Grayson, the prison warden, first noticed her during a routine inspection. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence, Michael had been in charge of the facility for over a decade. Normally, inmates blurred together into the same weary faces, but Elena did not. She sat alone, her tray untouched, her hands folded neatly, her gaze fixed on the floor, as though she were somewhere else entirely. There was something magnetic about her silence. Unlike the others who begged, screamed, or threatened, Eleanor radiated restraint. To Michael, who lived in a world of constant noise and chaos, that quiet control felt unusual, almost dangerous. Later, in his office, Michael found himself thinking about her again. Why her? Why did her stillness linger in his mind when he had seen Hojas, hundreds of inmates before? He told himself it was professional curiosity, that perhaps she was manipulating others under the radar. Yet deep down, he knew it was something more. That evening, while walking past the cells, Michael slowed near Elena's. She sat on the lower bunk, scribbling in a small notebook she kept hidden beneath her pillow. Her posture was straight, almost elegant, as though prison walls could not touch her dignity. Without lifting her head, she spoke softly, almost as if she had sensed him standing there. "Careful, Warden," she whispered. "Curiosity is dangerous in here." Michael froze. The words were not a threat, not quite, but they carried weight. A warning, perhaps, or an invitation. He walked away without answering, but her voice followed him down the hall. That night, as he tried to sleep, Michael realized something he didn't want to admit. Elena Torres was no ordinary inmate, and soon she would no longer be just another prisoner in his facility. Michael Grayson returned home that night, but the silence of his own house felt heavier than the silence inside the prison. His wife Laura moved around the kitchen with the kind of distant efficiency that had become routine. She didn't ask about his day, and he didn't ask about hers. Their marriage, once built on passion and shared dreams, had withered into polite cohabitation. Dinner was eaten with the television humming in the background, a distraction from words neither of them had the energy to say. Michael noticed her glancing at her phone more than at him. He wondered if she was texting someone, though he didn't dare ask. Paranoia whispered in his mind, but it was drowned out by a deeper ache. Loneliness. At night, when he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Michael found his thoughts drifting back to Elena Torres. Her whispered warning, "Curiosity is dangerous in here," echoed in his head. It was absurd, he told himself. She was an inmate, a fraudster, a manipulator. Yet he couldn't forget the quiet strength in her voice, or the way her eyes seemed to pierce through the walls he had built around himself. The next day, while making rounds, Michael's gaze fell on her cell again. Elena sat reading, her face calm, her posture almost regal. This time she looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment The noise of the prison faded. She didn't smile, but there was something deliberate in the way she held his gaze, like she knew he would stop, like she had been waiting for it. That afternoon, Michael found himself lingering near her during lunch. Elena didn't speak at first. She only glanced at him, then lowered her eyes, letting silence do the work. Finally, she murmured just loud enough for him to hear. "Strange, isn't it? How people can be surrounded by others and still feel utterly alone." The words stung. She had spoken the very thing he lived with every day. He should have walked away, reported her for inappropriate behavior, anything to re-establish control. Instead, he stood frozen, caught between duty and desire. In the following weeks, their exchanges grew. Brief, hushed conversations in corridors, fleeting glances during inspections. Each word felt like a secret. Each glance carried the thrill of danger. Michael knew he was crossing lines. He was the warden. She was an inmate. But every time she spoke, every time she leaned closer, the walls between them thinned. And one evening, when Eleanor let her hand brush against his as she passed, Michael didn't pull away. He let it happen. That was the moment the boundary cracked. It began with small transgressions, words exchanged too long, hands brushing too close. But once a boundary cracks, it never truly holds. For Michael and Elena, temptation became inevitability. One late evening, after the cell block had quieted and the routine checks were done, Michael lingered near the administrative wing. Eleanor had been assigned cleaning duty there, a request he had quietly approved. Their eyes met as she swept the floor, the mop sliding over the linoleum with a rhythm that echoed in the silence. He should have left. He should have walked away. Instead, he closed the door behind him. "Elena," he said, his voice low, hesitant. She looked up, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, deliberately, she stepped closer. "You shouldn't be here, Warden." Her words were a warning, but her eyes told a different story. Michael reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That single touch ignited a hunger he had suppressed for too long. Within moments, restraint dissolved. The prison walls, the rules, the risk, all faded beneath the intensity of their collision. Their affair unfolded in hidden corners and locked storage rooms, each encounter more reckless than the last. The secrecy only fueled their passion. Michael convinced himself it was love, that Elena understood him in ways no one else could. In her arms, he wasn't the warden, the failing husband, or the lonely man. He was wanted, needed, alive. But Elena was not driven by love. She was calculating. Each stolen moment was a thread she wound tighter around him. She whispered promises of loyalty, told him he was the only one who ever saw her for who she truly was. She leaned into his weaknesses, pulling secrets from him like confessions in the dark. "You're all I have," she would murmur against his ear. "You're the only one keeping me sane." Michael believed her. He needed to believe her. The emptiness of his home life, the quiet contempt in his wife's eyes, made Elena's attention feel like salvation. Yet behind her tenderness lurked a shadow. When she smiled, there was a flicker of something else, satisfaction, maybe even triumph. She had him where she wanted him, and he didn't even see it. One night, after a hurried encounter in a supply closet, Elena rested her head on his chest. Her voice softened, almost tender, but carried an edge he didn't recognize. "You trust me, don't you, Michael?" "Of course," he answered, without hesitation. She smiled, pressing closer. "Good. Because secrets can be dangerous here. And trust is everything." Michael kissed her, blind to the deeper meaning in her words. He thought he had found refuge in her arms. What he didn't know was that beneath her warmth Eleanor carried a truth that would shatter everything. Because hidden inside her silence, wrapped beneath her affection, was the secret she had not yet revealed, one that would turn passion into poison. The air in the storage room was heavy with the scent of bleach and sweat. Michael's pulse still raced from their latest encounter, his shirt clinging to his skin. Eleanor sat on the edge of the supply table, her gaze steady, unblinking. She wasn't smiling this time. "There's something you need to know," she said softly, almost tenderly, as if confessing a secret to a lover. Michael frowned, brushing a hand through his hair. "What is it?" She hesitated, letting the silence linger long enough to twist his nerves. Then, with deliberate calm, she spoke the words that would hollow out his chest. "I'm HIV positive." The world seemed to collapse in a single heartbeat. Michael froze, his breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, knocking against a shelf of cleaning supplies, bottles rattling to the floor. "That's not—" His voice cracked, disbelief choking him. "That's not possible. You should have told me." Elena's eyes narrowed, her tone chillingly composed. "And if I had, you wouldn't have touched me. You would have walked away." Rage surged through him, but so did fear. He felt sick, dizzy, the ground tilting beneath him. Images of his wife flashed in his mind, her face distant yet familiar, and the guilt stabbed deeper. "You've ruined me," he whispered, his voice shaking. Elena leaned forward, her lips curling into a faint smile. "No, Michael. I've given you something no one else could. I've given you freedom. You don't belong to your wife anymore, or this prison. You belong to me. Only me." He wanted to hate her. He wanted to walk out and end it all right there. But her words, her presence, still pulled at him like chains. Even now, with terror coursing through him, he couldn't ignore the heat of her gaze, the intoxicating way she held control. When he finally found the strength to speak, his voice was laced with fury. "If anyone finds out—" She cut him off. Her tone sharpened like a blade. "If anyone finds out, I'll make sure the world knows. Your wife, the department, everyone. Do you really want to lose everything?" Michael stared at her, caught between rage and desire, freedom and destruction. He should have ended it. He knew that. But as he left the room, her voice followed him, soft and poisonous. "You can't escape me now." And deep down, he feared she was right. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and dread. Michael sat rigid in the chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. The prison doctor, an older man with weary eyes, folded the test results and cleared his throat before speaking. "It's confirmed," he said gently. "You've contracted HIV." The words detonated inside Michael's chest. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and the world shrank to a tunnel. He barely heard the rest, the talk of treatment, medications, monitoring. All he could hear was Elena's voice echoing in his mind. "You can't escape me now." That night, he drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until his hands ached. Laura asked why he was late, but he brushed her off with a muttered excuse. In the bathroom, he stared at his reflection, sweat dripping down his temples. The warden who once commanded authority now looked like a man collapsing under invisible chains. Back at the prison, Eleanor wasted no time. She knew. Somehow, she always knew. When he passed her cell during rounds, she whispered through the bars, her tone calm, almost tender. "You're mine now, Michael. That makes us stronger than anyone else here." He didn't respond, but his silence was an answer. Soon, the demands began. First, it was small favors. An extra meal, more time in the library, a few minutes outside curfew. Michael told himself it was harmless, just minor bending of rules to keep her quiet. But Eleanor was never satisfied. She pushed further. Contraband, cigarettes smuggled past security, a cheap cell phone hidden inside a hollowed book. At first, Michael resisted, terrified of discovery, but Elena's voice was relentless. "You owe me. If I talk, your life ends. Not just your career, Michael. Everything." And so he gave in. Each act chipped away at him, corroding his authority. Guards began to notice the unusual privileges Eleanor enjoyed. Inmates whispered about her power, yet no one dared confront her directly, because somehow she seemed untouchable. Michael felt the walls closing in. Every time he slipped her contraband, every time he unlocked a door he shouldn't, his heart pounded with the risk of exposure. But Elena only grew bolder. She would touch his arm during inspections, lean close enough for others to notice, and smile as though daring him to stop her. The balance of power had shifted completely. Michael was no longer the warden in control of a prison. He was a prisoner of Elena Torres. One evening, after he delivered another package to her cell, she pressed her lips close to the bars and whispered, "See how easy it is? You'll give me anything I want. Because if you don't, everyone will know what we've done. Everyone will know what you are." Michael walked away, trembling, shame and fear clawing at his chest. For the first time in his career, he dreaded returning to work. Because the prison wasn't just Elena's cage anymore. It was his. Michael's home no longer felt like a refuge. He sat at the dinner table, barely touching his food, while Laura studied him with cautious eyes. She had grown used to his long hours, but lately his distance felt different, colder, deliberate. "You're somewhere else," she said finally, her fork resting against the plate. "You come home late. You barely speak to me. What's going on, Michael?" He forced a tired smile. "It's the job. Stress. Nothing more." But Laura wasn't convinced. She noticed the way he avoided her gaze, the way his hands trembled when he thought she wasn't looking. At night, he turned away from her in bed, leaving a gulf of silence between them. She reached out once, touching his arm, but he flinched as though burned. The rejection cut deeper than words ever could. At the prison, the walls of secrecy began to thin. Guards exchanged knowing glances when Eleanor walked by, with privileges no inmate should have. A library visit extended too long. A meal tray delivered twice. The whispers travelled faster than Michael could contain them. "Warden's playing favourites," one officer muttered under his breath. Another replied, "Favourites? More like something else." Michael overheard once, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Every denial risked attention, and attention was deadly. Elena, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on the rumours. She held her head higher, her steps lighter, her eyes burning with satisfaction. The other inmates noticed. She was untouchable, shielded by the very man sworn to control her. Michael tried to bury the fear under routine, but cracks appeared everywhere. His temper flared over minor mistakes from his staff. His patience evaporated at home. He drank more, slept less, his reflection in the mirror hollow-eyed and haunted. One evening, Laura confronted him again. "I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I don't care now you anymore." Her words pierced him. For a fleeting second, he wanted to confess everything. The affair, the infection, the way Eleanor had wrapped her chains around his soul. But the thought of the fallout paralyzed him. Instead, he muttered, "I'm fine," and walked away. But deep inside, he knew he wasn't fine. The mask was slipping, and soon, someone would see the truth beneath. And when that happened, it wouldn't just destroy his marriage, it would destroy him. Michael hadn't slept in days. His eyes burned from exhaustion, his thoughts a chaotic storm he couldn't silence. At work, every whisper from staff felt like an accusation. Every glance from an inmate a reminder of the power Elena held over him. The pressure was unbearable. That evening, he found her alone in the laundry room, folding sheets with calm precision. The sight of her composure only fueled his rage. He slammed the door shut, the echo reverberating through the walls. "We're done, Elena," he hissed, his voice sharp and trembling. "No more demands, no more games. You're not in control here. I am." Elena lifted her head slowly, her expression smooth, almost amused. "Is that so?" she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man dangling on strings I'm holding." Michael's fists clenched. "You've ruined my life. My marriage is falling apart. My staff suspects me. Do you realize what you've done?" She took a step closer, her eyes flashing with quiet triumph. "What I've done? Michael, you made the choice. You let me in. You risked everything. And now—" She leaned close enough that he felt her breath. "You belong to me." Rage boiled over. He shoved her back against the table, his hand gripping her arm. "I could end this right now," he growled. "One word from me, and you'll lose every privilege, every bit of power you think you have." But Elena didn't flinch. She laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "Do it then. But remember, if I go down, so do you. Your wife, your career, your reputation. All of it burns with me. Imagine the headlines. Prison warden's affair with HIV positive inmate." The words stabbed like knives. His grip faltered, and in that instant she twisted free, glaring at him with a dangerous mixture of defiance and delight. "You see?" she whispered. "You'll never escape me. Even if you hate me, you'll keep coming back, because hate and desire, they're not so different, are they?" Michael staggered back, his chest heaving. He wanted to strike her, to silence her, to end this nightmare, but he couldn't. She had woven herself too deeply into his life, into his very skin. When he finally left the room, his hands still trembling, he knew the truth. Elena wasn't just his prisoner. She was his captor. And something inside him feared that only one of them would survive this game. The morning after their violent confrontation, Michael moved through his routine in a haze, every step heavy with dread. Elena's words, her threats, her mocking laughter, echoed in his skull like a curse he couldn't silence. He barely slept, and when he did, her voice invaded his dreams. By the time he reached the cell block, he felt as if his own body were a shell, hollow and waiting to crack. The first sign that something was wrong came from the hushed murmurs. Inmates whispered urgently to one another, their eyes darting toward Elena's cell. A rookie officer waved Michael over, his face pale. "She's not responding," the guard said nervously. Michael's heart dropped. He pushed through the doorway, and there she was, Elena, sprawled on her narrow bunk, lips tinged blue, eyes half open but lifeless. A bedsheet knotted around the bars above her told the official story. Suicide. Clean. Simple. Convenient. But Michael's chest tightened as he studied the scene. The knot looked too neat. The position too deliberate. Elena was manipulative, calculating, yes, but suicidal? She thrived on control, on power. Would she really give that up? Paramedics pronounced her dead quickly. The warden gathered staff for a terse briefing. "Official ruling, suicide," he declared, his tone brooking no debate. "She left no note, no signs of struggle. File it clean, move forward." But moving forward proved impossible. Whispers buzzed through the cell block like static. Some inmates claimed they heard a struggle the night before. Others swore Elena had dirt on guards, powerful enough to get herself killed. Rumors grew wild. Poison slipped into her food, a staged hanging, even payback from rival inmates. Each theory dug deeper into Michael's fragile mind. He couldn't breathe.
If someone silenced her, who else knew about their affair? About his infection? His complicity in smuggling? Elena had promised to destroy him if he crossed her, but now she was gone. Did she carry her secrets to the grave, or had she already scattered them like seeds waiting to bloom? That night, Michael sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Instead of relief at her absence, terror filled the void. Without Elena's voice, there was only silence. And silence was worse. Silence meant someone else might be pulling the strings. When he finally closed his eyes, he saw her face, lips curved into a final smirk, as if mocking him from beyond the grave. And in that smirk lay the unspoken question: had she truly taken her own life? Or had her death only marked the beginning of something darker? The morning after Elena's death, the prison felt different, quieter, heavier. Inmates moved through routines with subdued energy, whispers trailing behind every step. The official announcement of suicide did little to smother the doubt lingering in the air. Too many had seen Elena's power, her hold over both prisoners and guards alike. To them, it seemed unlikely she'd suddenly surrender to despair. Detectives arrived before noon, their presence slicing through the uneasy atmosphere like a blade. Sharp suits contrasted with the dull grey of the prison walls. They asked questions, demanded records, studied surveillance. The warden paraded compliance, but unease bled from his rigid posture. He knew the reputation of men like these. They weren't here to check boxes. They wanted blood. Inmates, sensing opportunity, began talking. Some told stories of Elena's manipulation, how she traded favors and secrets like currency. Others described seeing her with Michael, hushed conversations in dim corridors, the way his hands trembled after leaving her cell block. A picture began forming, one far uglier than Michael could control. When detectives turned their attention to him, Michael tried to steady himself. He leaned on professionalism, insisting his role had been limited, procedural, nothing more. Yet cracks showed almost immediately. Asked why he'd been seen entering restricted areas after hours, he hesitated. Pressed about Elena's privileges, extra phone time, contraband items, he fumbled for explanations that didn't come. The more he spoke, the deeper he sank. Contradictions piled like stones around his neck. He said he barely knew her, but inmates insisted otherwise. He denied bringing her contraband, yet evidence suggested otherwise. The detectives noticed every twitch, every pause. His face, once the mask of authority, betrayed guilt even he didn't recognize. At home, Matt. Terrors worsened. His wife had already grown suspicious of his distant behavior, and now investigators knocked on their door, asking questions she wasn't prepared to hear. Why was her husband's name tied to an inmate's suspicious death? What secrets had he hidden beneath the uniform he wore with such pride? Back in the interrogation room, Michael's world shrank. The detectives leaned forward, eyes like predators circling prey. One question cut sharper than the rest. Officer Michael, did you love her? His lips parted, but words refused to come. Silence filled the space where denial should have been. The investigators exchanged glances. They had enough to keep digging, enough to keep him under their thumb. Michael left that room knowing the walls were closing in. Elena might be gone, but her shadow clung tighter than ever, and soon the truth, whatever version prevailed, would decide his fate. The storm that had been gathering around Michael finally broke. The investigation into Elena's death had already left him exposed, but now the aftermath spread like wildfire beyond the prison walls. News outlets seized on the scandal. A prison nurse entangled with an inmate who had suddenly died under mysterious circumstances. Reporters hovered outside his home, and neighbors whispered whenever his car pulled into the driveway. Inside that house, silence reigned. His wife had tolerated his growing distance for months, attributing it to the stress of prison life. But now she saw clearly. The lies, the evasive answers, the hollow reassurances. They all painted a picture she could no longer ignore. When the headlines named Michael as a central figure in the case, she packed her bags. Her last words to him, spoken in a voice stripped of all warmth, cut deeper than any accusation. "You've destroyed everything." At the prison, Michael became a ghost in plain sight. The staff, once his colleagues and friends, now treated him with thinly veiled contempt. Conversation stopped when he entered a room, and files were quietly reassigned so no one had to work closely with him. The weight of suspicion crushed any authority he had left. The inmates, emboldened by the chaos, mocked him openly. Some whispered threats through cell bars, testing his breaking point. Meanwhile, Michael's body betrayed him. The infection that had first tied him to Elena refused to stay hidden. His skin showed signs of strain, and his energy dwindled with each passing day. He avoided doctors, terrified of what medical records might reveal. Each time he caught his reflection, he barely recognized the gaunt, exhausted man staring back. The walls closed in tighter with every passing hour. At night, he lay awake, replaying Elena's taunts, her final smirk, her threats that she could ruin him. Now, with her gone, her words echoed louder because the ruin she promised had arrived without her lifting another finger. His career crumbled in public view. Administrators placed him on leave, citing serious concerns pending investigation. Professional boards began inquiries into his conduct, and his name was dragged through every local headline. The title of nurse, that once gave him pride, now hung around his neck like a shackle. Yet the worst consequence was not the loss of his marriage, his career, or even his health. It was the gnawing uncertainty, the question of whether Elena's death had been a suicide, or whether someone else had silenced her before she could expose more secrets. And if that were true, then who would be next? Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the circle was tightening, and that soon there would be no escape. The gavel's echo still rang in Michael's mind long after the courtroom emptied. Life without parole. The sentence had been read with chilling finality, and yet it didn't feel like justice to him. It felt like something far darker, like a curse. The media headlines painted him as a villain. The staff at the prison where he once walked with authority now sneered at his downfall, and the inmates who once feared him whispered about his sins in the dark. Michael had gone from doctor to convict, healer to pariah. Behind bars, stripped of the privileges that once set him apart, he was just another man awaiting slow decay. The nights were the worst. Every time he closed his eyes, Elena appeared. Sometimes she stood silently in the corner of his cell, her face half hidden in shadow, her lips curved in that familiar, taunting smile. Other nights, she whispered his name in a voice only he could hear. "Michael, did you do it? Or was it me all along?" The whispers twisted in his skull until he no longer trusted his own memories. He replayed their last fight endlessly, trying to separate reality from imagination. Had his hands truly wrapped around her throat, or was that only the nightmare that haunted him? The official report claimed suicide, yet the doubts gnawed at him like rats in the dark. Other inmates, sensing his unraveling, fed the legend. Some swore Elena hadn't died at all, that her spirit roamed the prison halls seeking vengeance. Others claimed Michael had struck a deal with forces beyond comprehension, that her death had marked the price of his secrets. Every rumor sank deeper into his fractured mind. His wife had divorced him, his children refused his calls, and his medical license was revoked. The infection that had once brought him fleeting closeness to Elena now marked him as diseased, untouchable. His body weakened, but his mind was trapped in a cell, much tighter than steel bars. And still the question loomed, was this justice? For the lies, the betrayal, the hypocrisy? Or was it merely a curse, Elena's final victory, condemning him to rot in uncertainty? Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Michael almost welcomed her presence. At least when she appeared, he wasn't alone. But then she would lean closer, her eyes glimmering with cruel amusement, and whisper the words that tore him apart. "You'll never know, Michael. Not in this life." He would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, staring at the empty shadows of his cell. The guards said he was losing his mind. The chaplain urged him to repent. But Michael knew repentance required certainty, and certainty was the one thing forever denied to him. Whether murderer or victim of fate, he was condemned to carry Elena with him until his last breath. Justice or curse, no one could say, not even Michael. And perhaps that was the true punishment.